I was talking with this guy the other day. This guy knows that I'm a pastor, and we were having this nice conversation when eventually he asked what my sermon for today was going to be about. And the word stewardship was barely out of my mouth when he rolled his eyes and said, "Oh yeah, our church did that last week, and I felt I needed to take a shower afterwards." And all I could do was just stare at him for a minute. I wanted to expound on the nature of stewardship and its importance to our faith formation, but his words hurt my little pastor heart. Because it makes me sad that stewardship has become such a dreaded word in the church today. Because as I've been saying for the past several weeks, true stewardship is about more than just bottom lines and pledge cards and budget items. Since we began this conversation about stewardship a few weeks ago, I've tried to broaden the scope of what it means to be a good steward of everything that God has entrusted to our care. Because at its heart, not just at my little pastor heart, but in all of our hearts, becoming good stewards is about becoming more like Christ. It's about cultivating healthy relationships with everything that's within our care. As stewards of creation, we're to love the earth and to care for its creatures, no matter how creepy or crawly or scaly or furry. As stewards of the body, we're called to care for ourselves as well as those social bodies that we're a part of. As stewards of the future, we're to nurture the next generation and care for all of God's children as we celebrated on Agape Sunday. And as stewards of the story, we're called to remember the past, to remember those saints that have allowed us to become the people that we are today and live into the fullness of the gospel story in our own lives. This is the ground that we've covered over the past few months. Nope, few weeks. Hasn't been that long. Just a few weeks. And as we've explored this more holistic sense of stewardship, there's been this recurring theme. I don't know if you've picked up on it, but I have. That in every aspect of stewardship, we've talked about what it means to cultivate healthy relationships. Whether it's a healthy relationship with the earth, a healthy relationship with our body, with our children, with our past. So our conversation about finances this morning is no different. When we talk about money, we often misquote the Apostle Paul, who helpfully diagnosed the root of all evil for us. It's not money itself, but rather the love of money that leads us down destructive paths. Because practicing good financial stewardship is about cultivating healthy relationships with money and not falling victim to its allures. Which is a lot more difficult to say than to do because we live in such a consumerist culture and we struggle with this economy of scarcity. Enough is never enough. But while the world would have us believe that money is power, the truth is that money only has power. And being good financial stewards means channeling that power to healthy ends and not letting that power take control of us. This means not defining ourselves by what we have or don't have. It means not determining our worth by how much money we make or have in the bank. And it means not justifying corrupt practices to bolster the bottom line. In this morning's quiet meditation in the bulletin, we see how Clement of Alexandria, one of the early church fathers, once compared wealth to an instrument. Because money has been a thing that the church has talked about from the beginning of time. Clement writes this: "If you use it skillfully, it is skillful. If you are deficient in skill, it is affected by your want of skill." Money is an instrument, but the proficiency of the tune that we play depends on our willingness to practice good stewardship of what has been entrusted to our care. Now, according to David King, who's the director of the Lake Institute on Faith and Giving at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, he writes this: "The power of money in our lives is too great to view financial stewardship as a matter of moving money from one column into another." Talking about financial stewardship isn't about asking for money or for making you feel guilty for not giving more. It's not about moving some money from your eating out budget into your church budget. Rather, a conversation about financial stewardship is an invitation for us all to examine our unique fears about money, our honest struggles, and the natural desire that we have to want more. Now, by no means am I perfect at this. A few weeks ago, when we discussed stewardship of the body, I had to confess that I had a piece of apple crisp for breakfast. And in this past week, in light of David and I's upcoming vacation and the holiday season, I vowed to not spend any more money on superfluous things. So what did I do the very next day? I bought tickets to a magic show because I'm literally watching my money disappear. No. What did I do yesterday? I spent the day at a Essie pancake breakfast raffle and the evening at the Firehouse turkey raffle. I didn't win a turkey, but the money went to a good cause, right? I'm not perfect at this, and I don't think many of us are. But I'm committed to the process of interrogating these choices, of laughing at them and making new ones in the future, moving forward with grace and greater awareness of how to live more fully into who God is calling me to be, who God is calling all of us to be. Practicing good stewardship is about cultivating a healthy relationship with money. And one way that we gain power over money, according to King, is by holding it loosely and deliberately looking beyond ourselves and investing in others. Being good stewards of our finances is more about cultivating a spirit of generosity than it is about becoming better money managers. This morning's gospel reading is the story of Zacchaeus, the champion of short people everywhere. And many of you know Zacchaeus' story from the classic Sunday school song, right? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. Oh, you want to keep going? I'm done. That was it. That's your 2 lines of music from me. But this is such a popular song that sometimes the only thing that we remember about Zacchaeus is that he was short, right? And this emphasis on his stature often leads us to read his story as a classic underdog tale, right? Where this man who won't let his literal shortcomings keep him from seeing Jesus. The lesson becomes about perseverance. Since Zacchaeus didn't let anything stop him from seeing Jesus, then we should do the same. But while we may remember Zacchaeus because of his height, that's really not what he was known for during his time. Do you remember how the writer of Luke introduces us to Zacchaeus? First and foremost, he says Zacchaeus is a wealthy man, a man of considerable wealth. Now, Zacchaeus isn't the first rich person that we meet in Luke's gospel. Just a few verses before we're introduced to Zacchaeus, another rich ruler approaches Jesus and asks what he must do to inherit eternal life. Do you remember what Jesus tells this ruler? Sell everything that you have, distribute the money to the poor, and then come back and follow me. Jesus calls this rich ruler to hold one's earthly treasures lightly, to have power over your resources and not the other way around. But the rich ruler is unable to do that. And he sadly walks away. And that's where Zacchaeus enters the scene. Another wealthy person who's eager to see Jesus, so eager that he runs ahead and climbs a tree. And in true Christ-like fashion, Jesus comes along and he stops right under the tree where Zacchaeus is sitting. He looks up, he tells Zacchaeus to come down, and he invites himself over for dinner. Jesus doesn't say anything about giving away his riches or feeding the poor. He merely saw Zacchaeus' hunger for something more. And he created an opportunity to invite Zacchaeus in. And in response, Zacchaeus makes a stunning declaration, unprompted by Jesus. Here and now, he says, I give half my belongings to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone in the least, I will pay them back fourfold. Having a face-to-face encounter with Jesus reoriented Zacchaeus' priorities. Encountering the one who healed the sick and ate with sinners and had compassion on the marginalized cast everything in a new light. It reorders our relationship with things. Caught up in Christ's hospitality, Zacchaeus was no longer captive to his money and riches. Instead, he opens his hands and his heart to those that he had exploited. And in response to Zacchaeus' reallocation of his wealth, Jesus says these powerful words. Today, salvation has come to this house. For this is what it means to be a descendant of Sarah and of Abraham. Salvation has come to this house, not just through Jesus' presence there, but through Zacchaeus' response to Jesus' presence there. Salvation comes through cultivating a spirit of generosity. It comes when we find ourselves caught up in the love of Christ rather than the love of money. It comes when we learn to hold our resources lightly. Practicing good stewardship is not so much about our budget or our investment strategies as it is about having a clear vision of who God is calling us to be. Zacchaeus climbed the tree to have a better vision. Being good financial stewards is not so much about writing down a number on a pledge card as it is about recognizing the power that money has and working to not let it overpower us. Cultivating healthy relationships with money requires us to be honest with ourselves, to be honest about our fears, our struggles, our love. It calls us to consider not just what we do with it once we have it, but also how we get it in the first place. Because I think the other way the church often curtails conversations about money is that we only talk about where our money should go. as if it doesn't matter where it comes from as long as it ends up in the offering plate. But a more holistic sense of stewardship calls us to pay as much attention to where we make our money as it does to how we use it. See, in addition to introducing Zacchaeus as a wealthy man, the second thing that we're told about him is what? He was a tax collector. And not just any old tax collector, but the chief tax collector. So all that wealth he had was most likely made by exploiting the people in his community. Becoming good financial stewards is not just deciding how to allocate our resources. It's also about evaluating where those resources come from. It's about an invitation to examine the nature of our vocation, the morality of our investment strategies, and the economies of grace and greed that are at work in the world every day. Encountering Christ prompted Zacchaeus to not only give away his wealth, but to subvert the very system that made him rich in the first place. Because sometimes being a good steward requires us to turn over a few tables and to clear out the money changers. It means holding ourselves as well as those in power accountable for their actions and realizing that our choices have effects on those around us. Being good stewards means choosing to participate in an economy of grace rather than an economy of greed. Believing in the abundance of God rather than the scarcity of goods in the market. Beloved of God, my goal throughout these past few weeks has not been to make you feel guilty or to stoke your pride about how much you are giving, about your stewardship practices. My hope has been for us to have healthy conversations about stewardship, because healthy conversations lead to healthy relationships. Beloved of God, you are called to be more than just a laborer. You were created to be a caretaker of God's bounty and called to walk in the light of God's grace. Not held captive to fear or closed off by greed, but invited to be stewards of God's abundant generosity, sharing God's love and following Christ's example. I know it is not an easy calling, but it is the way that leads to salvation. Amen.